Welcome back.
Welcome back, family. I'm Renee,
I am Curry.
and I want to say thank you once again, as always, for hearing us out. To our longtime subscribers, thank you for sticking around. To hear our thoughts and
hmm
opinions, and to our new listeners and subscribers, thank you for finding us and for hearing us out.
Thank you.
hmm
And on this episode, we will want to continue trying to redefine
hmm
things. On the last episode, we rounded off our discussion on victory and, redefining what that means. But
hmm
now we want to begin a discussion about culture,
hmm
right? Because throughout many of the episodes, anytime we've talked about culture, we've talked about how the culture needs to change.
hmm
About how at least from my perspective, I
hmm
always tend to say that culture and tradition, these things are a trap.
hmm
They limit our perspective of who we are and what we're supposed to be, and
right?
strains
And
it down
and
to
I've
these
always
known patterns.
thought of culture as not so much as a trap, but for me, it's more of a guide of of how to go about doing things. And so with this look at looking at culture, and I'll say redefining, it's it's a way to look at it as you know without people, you don't have a culture. And I think a lot of times, we think of culture as something that comes before versus what people create and establish. And so since we are an evolving people, always changing, I think that, our culture needs to move, with us. And a lot of times we think of culture as just this one thing, and it can only, be that. And so, I'm looking forward to, this conversation, and seeing how it goes in regards to
Well,
culture.
because culture is often, like I said, I call it a trap
hmm
because, like I said, it limits. It's
hmm
often used to limit, uh, limit us,
hmm
limit what we say we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to go about, being that thing.
hmm
And it's always not about trying to be what's necessary in the moment,
hmm
but trying to fulfill some nostalgia,
Uh-huh.
some
Yeah.
picture that we have in our heads of who we're supposed to be.
hmm
That was never, and it was never real.
Okay.
It's always just this picture, this ideal of of what a black man is supposed to be and a
hmm
black woman is supposed to be. These things we feel are defined,
hmm
and that how we're supposed to solve this is us going back to these traditional roles and doing that thing
hmm
and just trying to make that work in a 21st century context.
hmm
And that is, I can't say that that's wrong,
hmm
you know but the thing is that those traditional roles failed us in the moment.
hmm
They failed us at the time, when all of these problems first started to become president.
hmm
And we can, I'll go farther and say that these traditional roles help to exacerbate
hmm
the problems,
hmm
because that we weren't we weren't able to respond the way we were supposed to.
hmm
We weren't being the people we were supposed to be, and our culture became, like I said, a trap because it stopped us from moving and reacting, in
Okay.
ways that would have allowed us
To answer the
to
present
answer the call,
call.
to do things differently and
hmm
to exist, not to have to,
Right.
deal with everything else.
hmm
And as I often look at culture and tradition that way, and it's always this, at least for me, this negative thing
hmm
that has constrained us to what we are now
hmm
and trying to be something that that has failed
hmm
us and that essentially we never were.
Right. See
But
that, but that's for me. That's the issue is that the thing that we say that that we were the myth building. I
mhm,
like to call it. The problem is that we like to exclude so much of what we were as well.
mhm,
And so when I look at culture and redefining, I guess you could say culture, I would like for us to look at us in our totality versus you know eliminating so much of who we are. And so because we had people who we thought that I guess weren't worthy, who were disposable. We we allowed ourselves to get caught up in something that, well, here we are, and we're still trying to have these hardened lines as if the things that we think didn't exist, you know but they did.
mhm.
So it's just a more of looking at us in our totality, and not finger pointing or blaming. It's just that now we just have to deal with you know all of us and who we are, and continue to grow and not see it as a negative, but just see it as a part of everything that we are. That's pretty much,
but yeah, and so in trying to change, like I say, at least for me,
hmm
trying to change how we think about how we go about applying and rationalizing, I could say, culture.
hmm
You know, I think it's 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 it's, it's incumbent on us to shift the dialogue away from looking at culture as this purely, you know, purely, what's the good word for this? As a purely, let's try to look at culture as a force of nature. Let's try to put culture in the same context as, like I said, as fire and water.
hmm
Look at it there.
hmm
And because all of this entire discussion came about from this book that I have read, that you also
hmm
read some of, and it was over the weekend and
Right.
everything
hmm
from last week. And during our discussion on victory, this is what I was reading,
hmm
and this book is called Transcendence: How Humans Evolved Through Fire, Language, Beauty, and Time. And this book was written by a woman called named Gaia Vance, and yeah, and in this book, she's literally tracking, the human evolution,
hmm
throughout, time,
Right.
and the things that pushed us forward and drove us forward. And reading this book, it started to become apparent to me that human evolution was not entirely guided by, you know, the natural world, by
hmm
us evolving, you know, to run from the tigers and stuff like that.
Right. hmm
And it wasn't purely a reaction to nature
hmm
as a I mean from a physical thing.
Right.
Our evolution was, at least how I'm beginning to see it, was primarily guided by our culture, by humans reacting to humans,
hmm
by us learning to live together.
hmm
That is what, more than anything, has guided our evolution. It's our culture, of trying to live together, and those things that come of that has led to true biological and genetic change in us. It has truly physically changed us,
Mm-hmm.
our culture. It has pushed us forward from an evolutionary standpoint. And that particular mindset of about culture is one that I've never had
Mm-hmm.
before, or one that I've never, thought of.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, I've always seen culture not as a guiding force of
Mm-hmm.
evolution, but as a byproduct of it.
Mm-hmm.
That we evolved, and our culture came of that. But it seems as if a lot of who we are, you said just from a physiological standpoint, is from our culture
Right.
and us responding to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that really changed how how I could allow myself to think about culture.
Mm-hmm.
Because now culture wasn't a trap.
Right.
Now culture was the opposite of a trap. What's like something a
A
freer,
free, yeah.
a liberator, that
Right.
the thing that pushed us forward,
Forward.
that kept us moving. You know, so now it's like what's changed?
Mm-hmm.
What what is it about now that makes me think of culture and tradition and these things as a trap
Mm-hmm.
when you know just from a anthropological standpoint or a purely scientific standpoint you can see it as, like I said, as a force of evolution,
Mm-hmm.
as a force of change.
Mm-hmm.
What is that dichotomy? Where does that come from? And just thinking about that led to this discussion here,
Right.
and trying to redefine culture and trying to see it as less of a trap and more of a agent of change.
Okay.
So if we had to define culture now,
Mm-hmm.
what would that definition be?
That culture is a it's more of a free flowing. It's not an appropriation because I think I talked about that. Is that I find that culture is it's not with one and it never comes down to one. Is that it's open and free flowing and we learn from each other and through observation and so it's not this condensed one thing. It's open. That's how I think about it now.
Well, because it's not that culture hasn't trapped us.
I think what has happened to us now, I guess you could say in the last century or so, maybe even
Last
longer.
few
Yeah,
millennia.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Is that once we start looking at ideas as it belongs to us, and you can't have it. Once we try to, I'm gonna say own, that's when you know problems, you know, surfaced. Because as long as it was cooperation and working across, you know, we didn't have, the at least from my understanding, we didn't have, the kind of issues that we have today. Once a particular group decided that this belongs to me and that you can't have it or you have something that I want and so I'm going to take, that's when
But where does that come from? Does that mentality not come from our culture?
I think how things are executed, how things, because one of the things that the author, mentioned, was is how like so many, the different stories that you see that's throughout, the different peoples,
Hmm.
you know, like that shared and learned experience, how it is that we learn language and communication, those type of things, you know, we felt that it benefited us all. And then once, you know,
But like I said, but that mentality of
hmm
ownership
hmm
of like you said of this belongs to me and stuff like that, does
hmm
that not come from our culture?
yes, you can
Yeah.
definitely say that that definitely comes from,
Yes,
our
that's what I'm
culture.
saying.
So,
Is that so? So our culture is a like truly reacting, and like we evolved the capacity for speech
hmm
and language
hmm
by dealing with each other,
hmm
by trying to communicate with each other,
hmm
because on a subconscious level, we knew that cooperation and helping each other and building community stuff like that was better for our survival than the alternative, right? That trying to build a network amongst each other
hmm
is a thing that we needed to do.
hmm
I don't think it is something that we did intentionally,
right,
that we just knew
right,
how to do it, but we saw others like us, and we felt this need to
hmm
to be together,
hmm
and so that need in and of itself is what drove us to speak to one another, what drove us to to evolve the capacity for language, and drove just this, like you said, giant diaspora
hmm
of language, of these stories, of these shared cultural hallmarks
hmm
that seems to be, like I said, ubiquitous in all of our cultures,
right,
right? But so yeah, our culture pushed us forward that way, but
hmm
our culture also gave rise to this ideal of ownership
hmm
and superiority,
hmm
and all of the things that you could say hinder us now,
hmm
right? So our culture, like I said, it's not that it doesn't trap us to a particular view
hmm
of who we are and what things are supposed to be, but it also pushed us forward. It also gave birth to this grand human collective that we see today,
hmm
right? But we exist as victims of that, as subordinates of it. We are crushed under it, of this, the machine moving today,
hmm
or we are oppressed by it,
hmm
and that doesn't come out of nowhere. So what is it? What is it about culture? What is culture? And redefining culture. What is culture that has both, that, like I said, that both helps and hinders? What is it about culture that has allowed us to be what we are today, and for better or for worse?
I think our environment might actually, play a role in that. When you're when you're on, I guess, when you're on land that's, you know, bountiful, and you're able to share,
Hmm.
right? And we know, people's, crowd, traveled the lands, and where things were bountiful in plenty, you're, I guess, you are more cooperative.
No, but
And
that plenty, that bounty came from cooperation.
I'm not disputing it. I'm
Yeah,
not disputing it. But when things get tight, and I think, the author even mentioned how, when
but that
things.
yeah, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Hmm
Is that we didn't know how to plant plants,
Mm-hmm.
how to be gardeners,
Right.
how to be
Right.
farmers, how to be hunters.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know how to do these
Mm-hmm.
things. It's just that we started trying things
Right.
and we would fail,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And but those who would succeed, who were,
Right.
effective, they got to pass on their
Yeah.
genes.
Right.
And in doing that, they were able to pass on their lessons.
Right. They pass
So
on their
more
skills. Right.
effective,
Mm-hmm.
skills and more effective lessons and ways of doing
Mm-hmm.
things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our cooperation,
Mm-hmm.
all of us, that bounty that we
Mm-hmm.
have, that comes from things being tight.
Mm-hmm.
That comes from things, not, of us not having,
Mm-hmm.
enough.
Mm-hmm.
That is where culture and community came from.
Mm-hmm.
We, from an evolutionary standpoint, decided that trying to help one another, trying to cooperate with one another was more effective than lone wolfing it,
Right.
trying to go it
That's
alone.
right. Being the individual. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
we that's on some subconscious level.
Right.
We made that decision
Mm-hmm.
because we know that it's more effective for us to do that. Our brains reflect that,
Mm-hmm.
just who we are biologically, how we
Mm-hmm.
develop biologically shows this need, this dependency that we have on each other
Mm-hmm.
implicitly,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So how in the world are we here?
Mm-hmm.
How in the world are we here with this, like I said, this idea of I have to get mine at the cost of everyone and everything else, and I have to be someone at the cost of everyone and everything else. How do
Well,
we
I'm
get
thinking that
here?
that was. I think.
How can culture, if our culture dictates that cooperation and brotherhood and all these things are literally
Mm-hmm.
what we need,
Mm-hmm.
yet we're here?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would think that that individualistic
Hmm.
type of attitude and doings was present as well.
Yeah,
You know, it was there with, along with the
yeah.
core. It's just
There's a
that,
lot of things that we did
uh huh,
that just from a purely like physical
uh
standpoint,
huh,
we couldn't afford to do,
right,
right? Like decorating. She talks about, in the book, like
mm-hmm,
decorating our spears.
mm-hmm,
There's these there were woodworks
right, and the
and,
different resins and,
necklaces and
mm-hmm,
all these things that at those times
right,
were created during very harsh
mm-hmm,
times on in planetary history, like during the ice age,
yeah,
and during these grand droughts, and
mm-hmm,
where
right,
these deserts
mm-hmm,
where we literally did not have the energy,
right,
you know
right,
to afford
mm-hmm,
these things,
mm-hmm,
yet we did them anyway.
mm-hmm,
And that we would do things that aren't as effective for us, right?
mm-hmm,
From we would, because of our individualism,
mm-hmm,
right? And that our individualism and the way we individually go about things has
mm-hmm,
also culturally pushed us forward,
mm-hmm,
right? You know, we were so like, yeah, the idea of the individual and the community and all that stuff was always paramount.
mm-hmm,
That we want to be ourselves, but in this greater context
mm-hmm,
of being together. We don't
mm-hmm,
want to surrender being who we are,
mm-hmm,
to be this one us,
mm-hmm,
right? So that was always there,
mm-hmm,
and it was never this.
right. So how is it this now?
Yeah, like how can a culture, right? Because you look at, I mean, like capital C culture
Mm-hmm,
for humanity,
mm-hmm,
this thing that has pushed us forward, that has shown that we that has shown us, that has pushed us toward being who we are, right? I said literally, physiologically. Said we are dependent upon each other. Like she does this very interesting part of the book when she talks about how, like, apes, chimpanzees, when they
mm-hmm,
give birth,
right,
their gestation period is much shorter.
mm-hmm,
Like and women have much larger,
hips and all,
hips and
yeah,
vaginal areas
mm-hmm,
that allows for them to give birth. And
mm-hmm,
when they give birth, their children you know,
They're pretty much on their own
yeah,
right then and there, right?
they have they're born with the instilled instinctual knowledge
Mm-hmm.
that they need.
Right.
They have a lot. It
Uh-huh.
takes months upon
Mm-hmm.
months, years
Mm-hmm.
for our children,
Right.
to learn the knowledge that they need to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, chimps, it
Mm-hmm.
takes them no more than a few
Yeah.
months, right? And like I said, and since human women have smaller hips
Mm-hmm.
and have smaller, areas to
Mm-hmm.
give birth in, they need the help
Yeah.
of other people
Right.
just to give birth,
Mm-hmm.
right? Cooperation and community, and just in our development, in giving
Mm-hmm.
birth and rearing
Right.
children, those things are implicit,
Right.
right? They're implicit
Mm-hmm.
in us, in the cultural DNA. We
Mm-hmm.
know that we need each other.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't be here
Right.
without it.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we have this rampant, like like I said, this rampant individualism.
Mm-hmm.
We live in the antithesis
Right.
of culture, or the antithesis of community,
Right. Mm-hmm.
right? This anti-community. How how is that how is that possible? What is it about us and our culture, right, that has led us to this point that seems to be contrary to what we are?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's been a shift in how we think, and there's been a shift in our behavior, and a lot of what you see is how
Mhm.
how we think is pretty much how we act. And so what we see right now is that this is where we are right now with this individualism has been almost, I don't want to say beaten, but it's been drilled in us.
How? How is it possible that a mindset like that can even exist if it has to come from this shared cultural memory? How is that even possible?
Well, when you look at where people dispersed,
Hmm.
you know, and I mentioned how, your environment, can impact you. You know, if
Yet
you
our environment has impacted us
right.
towards cooperation. It was through the harshness and the hard times that community was born. That's where the bounty comes from. That's what has allowed us to tame our planet.
Hmm. But when you look at this proverbial thought of the individual and individualism, let's
Hmm.
play, comes from, and then you think about that area, that land, it wasn't as bountiful,
That's what I'm saying.
right? That's what I'm saying. So,
Community allowed them to survive. It's what gave rise to the bounty. It's what
hmm
allowed them to have enough food, and which allowed them to have enough energy to, you know. But like those things were investments. Like you said, we literally did not have the energy for each other
hmm
at the beginning. We were physically incapable of eating the food that we needed to eat to give us that energy. But we decided to do it anyway because we knew on some level that it would be easier and more effective for us to live and work together to try to tame our
hmm
environment,
hmm
to create something for us.
hmm
That it would be more effective than us, than the alternative of us not having these things.
hmm
Like that came during harsh times. That came when humans weren't the humans on the planet. Where all of our cousin species were still around.
uh-huh.
The Neanderthals and all the other human species
Right.
existed.
hmm
right? When all of that was still, when there was all this competition, when all these animals, when we before we even knew how to make fire,
Mm-hmm.
we were together.
Right.
You said our language, like the capacity for that,
Mm-hmm.
came from that.
Mm-hmm.
It was through the harsh times
Mm-hmm.
that these things came. It was through us not being able to survive in our environments on our own and stuff like that. That's where this comes from. So how is it possible that like I said, this shared cultural membrane that creates these hallmarks that seem ubiquitous throughout all our cultures, these particular frames of thought, our faiths, our just artistic accoutrement,
Mm-hmm.
all these things seem, like I said, seem ubiquitous. They're everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
but they all seem to be telling the same story. And there's variation among it,
Mm-hmm.
but it all seems to be the same story. There seems to be one shared cultural impetus for all of us, right? So how is it even possible? How is it even possible that we can have the idea of I must survive at the cost of everything else? That it is okay for me to sacrifice others and like the entire for
Mm-hmm.
where we are now,
Right.
that I have to exist in spite of everyone else, that I have to grow beyond everyone else, right? That my survival has to come at the cost of everyone else and everything else. How is it even possible that that mindset can even exist?
Because maybe that mindset was always present too. It's just that, when when you when you see and you experience, differently, right? And at that time, the mindset of people were different. How was it that the mindset of a cooperation? How does it go from cooperation to this individualism? Right. That's what you're asking. How does it? How does it?
How is it possible
Mm-hmm.
that something like this can even exist if we have this culture, if we have this same impetus? How is that even possible?
It was always present. It
Hmm.
wasn't. It wasn't as if it. I don't think it was not ever present. It's just the the majority of
But we know it didn't work.
that's true. That's why it well, it didn't work because folks continue to operate through that cooperation. You know, things
Because
just
we
don't.
needed
Yeah,
to survive,
right.
literally needed.
So how does you know? Sometimes things break on their own, and then other times it was just built wrong from the beginning. And so I'm looking at it as you know both of those things were always present. It's just that the cooperation, that force, that energy, was much more, was just much stronger. Not much more, just was just stronger. You don't have the same. We don't have the same. At least today, I don't see us having the same type of energy for cooperation.
But we do, though. The entirety of human society is built on it.
I'm not disagreeing there. What I'm saying is that we have among us, now this mentality of, you know, the pull yourself up by the bootstraps and hard work and this will pay off and you too can fly to space. You know,
Hmm.
and so
But that's what I'm saying. But just from a just like
but the thing is that we We know that's for, you know, those are like individual. The way we even define success now, you know, we look at, that stuff as successful, while while most of us are.
So, like, but what changed? How was that? How could? Okay, if that particular mindset was always present in us, but
Mhm.
never effective,
Right. Hmm.
right?
Hmm. What makes it effective now?
What
That's
would have changed to make that, yeah, to make that mindset effective and possible now?
hmm. Well, I would lend. I would just say racism. You know that, because you didn't even have, in that time of antiquity, like the hundreds, 10,000, 100,000 years ago, you know, where you have these people interacting, all across.
But it was, you can say it was worse because literally there were non-human, proto-human
Right.
species that we were dealing with.
Hmm.
We shared the planet with Neanderthals.
Right.
Right? Neanderthals aren't humans; they're a cousin human
Right. Right.
species. Right?
Hmm.
We shared the planet with them.
Hmm.
We breeded with them. There was no giant,
Right.
genocide of the Neanderthals,
uh,
right? And all the other proto-human species that were
hmm.
on the planet, who we breeded with them, and dealing with them was another thing that helped to push us forward.
Uh-huh.
That's what I'm saying. So there was literally
Right. They're like other
human
different people.
subspecies on the
Right.
planet.
So, but so how do we go from? So how did we? It's the question.
How
How
is
do
it?
we move from?
How in the world are we here?
Right.
Like human society is, for as far as we know, for
Uh.
all of human history, has never been like this.
Hmm.
This is the most interconnected we have ever been.
Hmm.
We are able to, so we are more reliant on each other for our way of life than at any other moment
Hmm.
in our history.
Hmm.
Literally, just about everything that we have came from some other
Yes.
person across the world
Hmm.
doing a thing,
Hmm.
and that person working with some other group of
Right.
people, and that
Hmm.
other group of people working with some other group of
Right.
people to make this laptop right here,
Right.
or this
Hmm.
desk.
Hmm.
We are like that. Everything is so interconnected.
Hmm.
We are so dependent on one another. It is, listen, it is in our
DNA.
DNA.
Right.
It is our cultural membrane.
Hmm.
It is who we are.
So we are working. We are working against. We are working against who?
We are working against
Ourselves.
ourselves. I
Yeah.
mean, we've known it for a long
All
time.
time.
We've
Right.
often said, that what we know we ought to be doing,
Right.
we know it.
Right.
Like
We know
when you
exactly what
say
we're supposed to. Right.
brotherhood, love, and stuff like
Hmm.
that, that we know that's the answer
Right.
because we've been doing it. That's how we got here.
Right.
So what is it about now?
Right.
What is it about now
Hmm.
that
We're
allows
working.
for
Right.
that now we're delusional?
Hmm.
What how is it even possible for us to even have this?
Hmm.
What happened culturally to get us here?
We lost our. We lost our way. Even
How?
how? Well, I think in the book the author mentioned how I think it's the was it the Greeks? I think she mentioned how they had lost their. I think it's their written language. I
Their
think it
writing
was
system.
their
They
writing.
became illiterate. They
Yeah,
didn't know how to read. They didn't know how to write.
right. They didn't,
Even though they knew,
right. At one time.
like during the dark, like this was during the Dark Age. This is after the Bronze Age collapse,
Hmm.
right? Where the whole world collapsed.
Right.
Everything that was
Right.
just all the great societies back then was gone. The
Right.
Minoans, the Egyptians, all
Hmm.
that kaput.
Right. Hmm.
Bad days,
Right.
right? And so the Greek society, and say that had these grand writing systems
Hmm.
during that Bronze Age, during the Dark Ages
Hmm.
after the collapse. They had this writing system.
Hmm.
They knew how to
Right.
write.
Hmm.
They knew how to read.
Right.
But the people that they were now
Right. We're
did not
not
know.
known. Right.
They knew they had this right. They
Hmm.
knew that back then they had this,
Right.
but now they don't.
Hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They culturally literally forgot
Right.
how
How
to
to write.
read and
Mm-hmm.
how to
Right.
write.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the grand epics come from,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or from the Iliad and the
Right.
Odyssey and stuff like that,
Uh-huh.
which were these, oral
Right.
stories. And it's saying it wasn't until Homer, who was a blind man,
Mm-hmm.
who was able to piece the language back together to write it down,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they rediscovered a thing that they already knew.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is that it needs to be rediscovered in us. I think we've
But what led to us losing it? Because then, can you say we lost it? Look at society now. Like I said, we are more interdependent than ever.
that, but I don't see the core. When I think cooperation,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anything forced.
But
And
it's not. We're not
you
forced to
know,
deal with each other. We weren't forced at the beginning. We just know
right? Uh
that
huh.
it's what we need to do.
Uh huh.
We know that it's better for us.
Mm-hmm.
Like society is more interconnected. Like I said, everything that we have that's been produced has been produced because of cooperation in the 21st century.
Yeah, but I don't see like the last. I'm trying to keep it in this times now. I
Mm-hmm.
don't see this last. I was like 19th century, 20. I don't see that as cooperation. The 18, 19, yeah, 18, so 18, 19, 20th century. I don't see that
Where
as
what would you call it? They didn't
co-op.
they didn't cooperate in their oppression of us.
How I'm thinking about is that a lot of this was, you know, was it was forced.
On who? By who? How is it possible? How is that possible?
We didn't ask to be here.
Yeah,
We were
yeah.
forced.
How is that possible? How is it possible for people to have that type of mindset coming from this cultural memory? How is that possible?
How was it possible to force?
How is it
I'm missing
possible?
something.
Like I said, how is
Huh?
it possible for someone to have that mindset coming from this cultural memory?
I will, like I've already stated that I think that the mindset was always present.
Yeah,
Right.
it was always
Uh-huh.
it was always present, but it was never conducive to society.
Right. So how did it become conducive to society?
Yeah.
It's not conducive to society.
So
We are working against.
so how does it exist?
It exists because we are. I'm gonna use the word afraid. We are afraid to check. Look at what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Just like I mentioned about the critical race theory. I always put
Yeah.
that in quotation marks. Right. You know, that's really just dealing with history.
Mm-hmm.
Confronting actual things that occurred, and you have people who are afraid of that. They are literally, you know, you can't even teach this in school. It's against the law. All kind of foolishness that people are doing to just run away from that. They are people are they're scared to deal with that because it feels because
That feels like a symptom.
Fed. Okay, you know what? Okay, okay, a symptom.
Where does that fear come from?
Where does the fear come from? It comes from it's it's one of the things in with humanity. It's just one.
Our fear has been ubiquitous, has always been a part of us. But our cultures were never born from them.
I I agree with that,
Yeah.
but I'm not saying that our culture, but
But
that was
that's what
an
I'm saying.
element of. I
Yeah.
mean, you didn't want to die. You
Yeah.
cooperated.
Yeah.
You did those
So
things.
we
You so.
knew
Mhm.
that cooperation was better for our overall survival.
Hmm. But now it's not about. I don't think now, but the mentality is that it's about all of us. It's only about the few.
How is that? But like, that's what I'm saying. How is that possible? How is that possible? When we literally, genetically, physiologically
Uh
know better. How is it possible when we have, listen, we have this cultural membrane? We've had this for a long time. It is what drove us forward.
hmm
It is
It's the
what
thing
everything
that was passed on even through our DNA and
we
genetically,
know it.
right? So
How in the world are we here? How can we get? How can this mindset even exist? Like I'm
it's
because we
like
shouldn't physically be capable of it.
I know, but the thing is that it's like we have it's like we pass on the good. If you want, I'm just
Mm-hmm.
gonna say, we pass on good. We pass on bad as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're
Yeah, but like you
they're
said,
both
that they've always. Yeah, I can agree with that.
right.
They've always been present,
Uh,
but we've always known
we've
better
we've always managed to.
because we've all because like just like I said, we know that cooperation is much more efficient and effective for our survival,
So why aren't we doing it?
right?
Right. That's
Not
basically.
why aren't we doing it,
Uh.
right? Because we all cooperate.
Okay.
How, it,
Okay. That's fine. We all cooperate. Yes. Well. Yes. Yes. Yes.
that's not even up for discussion.
We're cooperating. Yes.
It's not up for discussion.
Okay. We're cooperating.
The entirety of human reality comes from
Yes.
cooperation.
Cooperation. I'm not disagreeing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how? Yeah. So how is it that this mindset can even exist?
I'm shrugging my shoulders. I'm shrugging. I'm shrugging. What?
I'm thinking.
Oh,
I'm trying to.
because I keep saying, because I'm like, it's. I'm not gonna. You know, we have cooperation. We have this long, history of it, and it's the thing with the copying and how it is that
Mm-hmm.
you know we copied each other the most the efficient of those machinations or whatever was passed on, passed on, passed on. But it's not to say that this individualism and selfishness, you know, wasn't, present. We just didn't operate in that because we operated in. I'm gonna say we operated in our
Yeah.
knowledge.
So what changed? What changed?
What changed? Why aren't we operating in our knowledge?
What changed?
I'm gonna. I think environmental factors, movement of
That
people.
doesn't make any sense.
It does.
No, it doesn't. Our
Why not?
cooperation came from environmental factors. So it doesn't.
Yes, 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 yes. It
Mhm.
did.
All right. So
But
what environment are we reacting to now that led to this? Let's say this rise of selfishness.
no,
You know what?
what? Yeah,
I think I got it.
because we sit there. I'm like,
I think I got it
I'm listening.
because now I'm starting to remember some other things that she talked about in this book. And she
Okay.
also because when she said that we are kind of a victim of our own success,
Uh huh.
she meant that from like an environmental
Uh huh.
standpoint,
That's right.
like from a
Yeah.
evolutionary standpoint.
Right.
But now, when I think about it,
Mm-hmm.
what environment were we reacting to that allowed for this rise of selfishness?
Mm-hmm.
I've said it the whole time. Like we were reacting to ourselves when we were in competition with and or partnership with our world,
Okay.
right?
Right. You need to see our faces. How we made these
Yeah,
faces. Right.
trying to
Right.
pick
Trying
the
to. Right.
words,
Right.
trying to pick the words here. When right? Because even though the environments were harsher,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's another part of this book which talks about how we culturally came to respect our planet, right? How
Okay. Yeah.
even when we went to go hunt deer,
Right.
right? When we killed deer, we would thank the deer and thank nature
Yeah, I think
for.
she mentioned that about a particular.
I
She
think there was
referenced
a
a particular
yeah. I
peoples,
think
the
there was a
Inuits or the Yukon, something like that.
some Native American
American. Mm-hmm.
tribe that
Right.
that was peoples that did that,
Right.
right? And how they had this mentality of like when things were the harshest is
Yeah.
when we had the most respect
Right.
for our environment.
Because how they looked at it was that the versus man, I'm gonna say hunting the deer or whatever,
Hmm.
but that the deer gave himself up,
Hmm.
to
Yeah,
help us. So they would do a whole
it was a whole
ritual and ceremony.
ceremony. Yeah,
Right.
but I'm
Right.
like, so I'm
Okay.
just thinking, but
Mm-hmm.
when that's when things were the harsh. That's when society wasn't perfected. Human society had not won yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It was
Yeah.
that sweet spot
Mm-hmm.
where we both existed, human society existed in tandem with the natural world. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't outpace it yet,
Right.
right? But now, like I said, we've outpaced the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
There are billions of us, right?
Yes. Right.
We are the, say, the most numerous mammals of our type,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're all over the place, and we required more and more of the world,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of led to this mentality that we've outgrown it in a sense, that we've tamed it, we've defeated it, that we're no longer existing in tandem with it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's okay.
now, since that has happened, this mentality, this selfishness that you said that has always been present in us,
Mm-hmm.
but couldn't survive
Right.
in those types of environments. But now that we are living in this solely human construct,
Uh-huh.
completely detached from any reliance on the natural world,
Mm-hmm.
right? That our reliance is purely on us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that we have taken so much of our world now. Only in this environment
Mm-hmm.
can that selfishness
Six.
exist and come to the forefront.
Right. So.
Now that we've outpaced everything
Uh.
else, right?
Right.
This is the only, so like I said, we're
So this
literally
environment, because
victims. Yeah, this is like I said,
I've said it.
but it was like, it's not it's the culture, literally the culture.
Uh.
That's how culture became a trend.
Mm-hmm.
When it Because like I said, culture pushed us forward, reacting to ourselves pushed us forward,
Mm-hmm.
but our community was never able during those times. So a majority of human history was never able to
Pace.
outpace
Mm-hmm.
everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But now it has.
Mm-hmm.
It has grown to such an extent that it has eaten everything else.
Mm-hmm.
There's really no other biome left on this planet that has not been untouched or that has not become engulfed in the human biome,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we are literally victims of our own success. Our our culture, which could not exist in that paradigm, or which selfishness could not exist in,
Mm-hmm.
literally because you could not survive.
Right.
But now, since we are living in a solely human construct, now it can.
Mm-hmm. We're our own
So
worst enemies,
yeah,
huh?
this dependency
Uh-huh.
on each other has been diluted
Yeah, diminished.
diluted into
Uh-huh.
this exacerbated, sense of self.
Uh-huh.
That's what happened.
Uh-huh.
That's how culture became a trap,
Mm-hmm.
because our culture went away from cooperating with everything to just cooperating with self.
Mm-hmm.
And that became so ingrained in us that it became only about the self at the cost of everything else.
But to know thyself is to be true.
Hmm.
So that's what I'm saying is that, well, yeah, we basically say is that it was always
Yeah, and like I'm saying,
there. Yeah, yeah, it was
it was
always there.
always there, but it was never effective.
Right,
That's what
because
I'm saying. So
your
what has changed?
change.
What changed to make this our reality?
Right. Is that
This delusion
our construct, our human environment, this
has overtaken
taken
everything
else.
else. So a thing that couldn't exist because we had to deal with everything else
Mm-hmm.
now can now only exist inside of this new
New. Mm-hmm.
human biome
Mm-hmm.
that consists of everything now.
Yeah.
That's eating everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only place that could possibly exist.
Yeah.
That's what's changed.
Mm-hmm.
We are victims of our own success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We never really needed self control. Everything else kept us in line.
Yeah, I'm about to say, yeah, when you are,
Yeah,
up against those other,
yeah.
yeah,
You learn to respect
yes,
it.
yes,
You never
right.
really. It was never a choice.
Mm-hmm.
It always comes back down to it. We never had
Had
to
to
choose
right?
to live with everything else.
Mm-hmm.
We just did. We
Did
just
mm-hmm.
had to. But now we need to choose
That's
it.
right. Got to make a choice. So here we so now we're looking at each other like,
Yeah, it's that thing
yeah,
we've always
we
talked
talked
about,
about.
but now here.
Yeah. Now we have to make that choice, and
Mm-hmm.
here it is. We're almost an hour in, and we were talking about how you know how that environment, that cooperation, that was the choice that we.
It wasn't a choice.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Like I said,
Well, yeah, I
it
use
was
the word.
a subconscious
Yeah,
choice.
right.
It wasn't an intentional one.
That's
It was
right.
just a thing that we did.
Mm-hmm. Now we have to make the decision.
Now it has to be a conscious
That's
decision
right.
to curtail these aspects of
Mm-hmm.
our humanity.
Yeah, yeah. Are you?
Of our, not humanity, of the human condition.
Yeah, fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So now, here we are.
Mm-hmm.
And are we willing to make the choice to cooperate?
Are we willing to choose this world?
Yes.
To choose to live with each other, to
mm-hmm.
cooperate, quote unquote,
yes.
with each other.
Uh-huh.
Right? Because we've never chosen it. It's just what we did.
Mm-hmm.
But now to choose it, that takes, like I said, acknowledgement.
That's
and
right.
once you acknowledge
You're
something,
responsible
for it,
mm-hmm.
all that good stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, so.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, so in conclusion. That's pretty good. Right?
Yeah, well, to let our listeners know.
So in conclusion,
this is how we pretty much
this is
have
usually
how we have
when
these conversations, right?
And we're trying to figure something out.
And work it out.
So so in conclusion,
mm-hmm.
redefining victory, much like redefining culture.
Mm-hmm.
has come down to us making a choice.
That's right.
A choice that we never had to make before
mm-hmm.
because everything else made it for us.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have a choice.
That's right.
But now we do.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have to choose a thing. Our culture it went from we have to choose it.
Right.
We have to choose to act on what we know.
Mm-hmm.
To act on that culture knowledge.
Right.
Because now we don't have to.
That's right. We don't have
to.
That's right. That's obvious.
Yeah.
And so here we are we're being confronted. That's that James Baldwin. We're being confronted. What choices are we going to make?
Mm-hmm. At the beginning of this episode, I said that I wanted to look at culture as a force of nature.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's what it's been.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But now we have to choose to reintegrate it, to rehumanize it. We have to choose to take culture out of that aspect and put it right back where it's always been.
Mm-hmm.
In us. So yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
It's pretty beautiful.
Having epiphanies at the same time.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does.
Because
it always comes out. And the thing is that we've talked about it
So
so
many,
many
like we
times,
said,
right?
catching up to that knowledge, catching
Knowledge.
up to what you know.
Yeah,
This is you
that's
just
it
seen
right
it
there,
right
right?
here.
Right. So yeah.
So yeah. So if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments, and thank you for hearing us out.
Thank you.